Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Troy Hartley. I'm the director of Virginia Sea Grant, and on behalf of Virginia Sea Grant, as well as the graduate school here at VIMS and the Thomas Jefferson Public Policy Program at William and Mary, welcome to the regular policy seminar series. Our next speaker, Aviv Goldsmith, is the managing director of development for Fishermen's Association, Fishermen's Energy, excuse me, in New Jersey. That I think at dinner last night, Jeremy said, I asked him, who's going to be the first person with a turbine offshore? And he said, these guys. So I know the governor of Virginia just announced that they have one they think is going up in Cape Charles, but these guys may beat him. Aviv has an undergraduate degree from Cornell, his master's from SUNY Environmental Science and Forestry School or college, I think, and then an MBA from Syracuse as well. So,
thanks, Troy. When I told my wife I was going to be a visiting scholar, she really laughed at that because last time I was called a scholar was when I was on the Bozo the Clown show 40 years ago. Here we go. I'm going to talk about three things: our company, Fishermen's Energy, how long it takes for public policy to manifest in the business community, and then also our project in New Jersey. Fishermen's Energy is a company that is formed by leaders in the commercial fishing industry in New Jersey. We have experience working on the water, have lots of seaside and on the water infrastructure, and basically decided to be proactive and participate in this new industry rather than sit on the sidelines and spend money in opposition. The offshore wind, if not done properly, will be negative for commercial fishing. Anytime you have obstacles for navigation in the water, it's challenging. Even though each particular turbine will create artificial reef, when you have obstacles for towing or for dragging, it's going to be a problem. Furthermore, depends ultimately on the government regulations that are applied and whether there are any exclusion zones. So Jeremy showed those bucolic photos of the wind farms, but the photos that aren't taken are ones like this. And my partners know how to work on the water, and also, most importantly, know when not to work on the water. There are weather restrictions that will prevent access to turbines, and also will prevent times when we can be under construction or not. My partners have major businesses in the Mid-Atlantic. We have facilities from Virginia up through Massachusetts. And the commercial fishing industry is subject to threats: climate change, loss of habitat, increase in petroleum prices. These are all things that contributed towards the decision to launch a new business, where personnel can be retrained, where boats can be redeployed, where docks can be used. This will all benefit the fishing industry. But of course, the fishermen don't have all the skills necessary to design, finance, build, and operate wind farms. So we form partnerships. I myself am a power developer. I've done a lot of renewable energy work. And the rest of our team includes lawyers and bankers and engineers, and relying largely on the European experience. Overall, our paradigm for our company is to have facilities sited properly, to minimize at the outset any competition for key fishing areas. Also to provide opportunities for the fishermen to invest directly in this new industry. And also to work with academia and with government to do some real research so that we can really understand what the long-term impacts are of this new industry. And in the end, if there are unmitigatable impacts, to provide a mechanism for some financial recompense to fishermen who are adversely impacted by this. In Europe, Offshore wind has been under development for 20 years. There are approximately 6,000 megawatts of facilities either operating or under construction. Just as a clear indication of the difference between Europe and here in the US, Germany decided that they were going to ultimately decommission all their nuclear plants and replace that energy with offshore wind. It's a major social decision that the country took. Here in the US, the dialogue about offshore wind has been going on for 10 years, and we don't yet have any facilities in the water. Our approach is to start with a small project, much like what happened in Europe, to develop experience in the construction industry, in the financial marketplace, and also to develop real environmental baseline information. Ultimately, as projects get bigger and bigger, the costs will come down. This is one of the key objectives of the US DOE's current program. They recently put out a request for information for 2 different co-funding opportunities. And Jeremy said that perhaps there was 251 gigawatts of potential in the Mid-Atlantic area. DOE is targeting 54 gigawatts. And I think even that is quite optimistic. But nonetheless, DOE projects that the price of this power will come down as the industry develops, roughly from 25 cents per kilowatt hour to 7 to 8 cents per kilowatt hour. There's been a lot of talk in the industry about, well, why should we do these small projects? Because they will be more expensive. But our approach is that unless you do the small projects, the big projects won't happen. There's tremendous uncertainty in the financial market, and letting bankers and insurance companies and engineers work on $200 million projects will be a lot easier than going immediately into billion-dollar projects. This dialogue in New Jersey started almost 10 years ago. A company came through and put in applications for offshore wind leases, and nobody knew anything about it. So the fishing industry was instrumental in initially getting a moratorium passed that there would be no offshore wind until it was studied further by the state. The state convened a blue ribbon panel which did desktop studies evaluating the impact both to the human environment as well as to natural resources and marine biota, and came up with the recommendation that a pilot project was really the best way to get going. And at that time they recommended a pilot project of 350 megawatts in size, which was actually sort of funny because the largest wind farm in the world at that point was 140 megawatts. Taking off of the state blue ribbon panel approach, the BPU, the Board of Public Utilities, submitted proposals for this pilot project. They were offering a $19 million incentive paid out over 5 years. We realized that 350 megawatts was too big for a pilot project. We also realized that a $19 million incentive for a project that cost more than $1.5 billion was inconsequential. And so we proposed a small-scale demonstration project, approximately 20 megawatts, to be followed on by the bigger projects. And the state liked this approach. Instead of awarding one big subsidy, they awarded 3 companies, ours was one of them, a subsidy to do meteorologic work in the water. And as a result also embraced the concept of over 1,000 megawatts of offshore wind ultimately in their energy master plan. The next thing the state did, which was quite good, was to do an environmental baseline study of the area that's potentially available for development. It's 70 miles long along the New Jersey coast and 20 miles wide. This was a 2-year study, included both above water and below water research, and at the end the conclusion was that if the facilities were properly sited, there would be no significant impact on wildlife. So after that, we took the cue that the ground was fertile for development of the pilot project. We entered into a memorandum of understanding with one of the ports, And we worked with the state government to draft a law that would let the state BPU create power sales rates over long term that would be sufficient to support the development of one of these projects. The law was passed in August of 2010. It authorized up to 1,100 megawatts of projects that could get a fixed power price for 20 years. And the state also was really keen on getting economic development, and so has offered up a $100 million tax credit if somebody locates a major facility in the state to build turbines. That's distinct from the power projects themselves. All of this depends on good data, and so nearly 2 years ago we also launched a buoy in the water that collects meteorologic information. You can see here Atlantic City in the background. This project site that we've identified is 2.8 miles off the coast, and so the turbines would clearly be visible. We've also built on the environmental work that the state did with avian and marine transects looking for endangered species. We've seen over 500,000 birds in the process and no threatened or endangered or candidate species. Nonetheless, we still have a discussion with U.S. Fish and Wildlife about whether or not there's potential for incidental take. We did acoustic monitoring and basically have determined that the only potential real impact from this to wildlife is during construction. Using a monopile construction method, there's a lot of pile driving that's required that will create sound, and so we've negotiated permit conditions that would require observers be present during the pile driving. If there were any marine mammals observed in the area, we could not start driving. If we saw any come nearby, we would need to suspend operations. We've done the geotechnical evaluation of the seabed, and based on that can work to design the foundations that we need to hold the turbines up. Also, we are looking beyond this first project, beyond the 25 megawatt pilot project, and trying to understand what's an economical way to assess the mid-ocean characteristics of a big area, so you could ultimately define where the best place is to put a wind farm. And so we currently have a program where we're evaluating side scanning LiDAR, vertical LiDAR, conventional MET towers and anemometers, and looking at the coincidence of this data. Initially, things look good, and the goal would be to develop a bankable approach using these new technologies. The LiDAR has been used a lot at airports, but has never previously been used for wind resource assessment in this way. And we've got a little bit of DOE funding. We're working with the New Jersey universities as well as industry consultants to test out this new technology. One of the reasons we were successful in getting local acceptance in Atlantic City is that there's an existing wind farm on the land in Atlantic City. There's 5 1.5 megawatt turbines there. And you can see over here, this structure is one of the newer casinos in town called the Borgata. And surprisingly, people come to the Borgata and they request rooms that look at the wind farm. So it's one indication of public acceptance. Also, you could see that it's not really disharmonious with the overall scenic background. So our plan is to develop this facility. It'll be highly visible. We're looking at it as a showcase for the industry. One of the problems with offshore wind so far has been in the U.S., it's very hypothetical. So DOE is interested in our approach in getting what they call steel in the water so that people can actually see what these turbines look like. And it's in relatively shallow water. It's manageable. It can be built with domestic fleet of vessels. Although we learned a lot from how things were done in Europe, We're not exactly following the European model. Their power sales regime and their transmission regime and regulatory regime are different. And so we're looking at the use of some new technologies, both for turbine foundations as well as for the turbines themselves, and believe that ultimately this can help reduce both the capital cost and operating cost of offshore wind here in the U.S. So our plan is to build 5 or 6 turbines, single submarine cable. One issue that has come up a lot with submarine cables and other water-based uses is dredging and anchors catching on submarine cables. So we will be burying our cable at greater than 3 meters depth, and we're working with the federal government to establish that as a benchmark for design. We believe that facilities that don't have cables buried that much, that have active vessel traffic or anchor use, are potentially problematic. The water depth is only about 40 feet, so conventional technology can be used. We also believe that new technology can be used that can make construction easier. We look to start constructing next year and be complete the following year. Actually, the construction time is not that long, but we can't be on the water in the winter, and so all the terrestrial work will be done in the winter, and then we'll move into construction on the water in the summer of 2014. Early on, we got a lot of support from local environmental groups. We did some polling, and every time one of these public polls has been done, the acceptance of offshore wind gets greater and greater. So the polls that were done 10 years ago were not that optimistic, and each one, as people both understand the technology and also understand the issues associated with economics and energy security, the results are better and better. So in Atlantic City, we have not had really any opposition at all. We plan to play an active role in building this project, but obviously using professional firms. It's quite a capital-intensive undertaking. And next month, we plan to finalize our design so that we can finalize the contracts for construction. We started the permitting in 2010 and have all of our state permits. We're still waiting on an Army Corps permit, which hopefully will be finalized in the next month or two. And the last big approval is an approval from the state of New Jersey for power sales rate. As I mentioned, we helped the state craft language that would let this process happen. You can read the language here that, you know, a small project located off the shore of a casino gaming community will be permitted. So they obviously couldn't play favorites, but nonetheless, everybody understands that our project is the one that was being talked about here. The state opened up a bid window, and we were the only ones who responded to that. So we're in the process of finalizing some of the background information on economics, and the project basically has to pass 3 tests: minimal impact on rates, the impact to the average New Jersey rate payer will be less than $2 per year. Positive employment and economic impact, we're able to clearly demonstrate that, as well as positive environmental benefits. We do plan to do post-construction monitoring for 2 years and make a lot of that information available. There is currently a competition between states as to who's going to be first. It's really not that important, but it is one of the drivers currently of political momentum to get these projects built. Ultimately, if the industry develops, we could take a brownfield site in New Jersey and create a new offshore wind factory. This will require quite a large commitment to this industry, which has not yet developed. But even the small project will create jobs. It will create millions of dollars of new economic activity, and that is what's driving each of the governors that's active in offshore wind states to advance this. We have a few other things we're looking at, again, in the same vein of trying to expand on our shareholders' basic core competencies. We will be designing and building a service vessel. We're looking at having an educational facility, both on land and running boat-based tours out to the wind farm. The more people understand about offshore wind, the more acceptance there will be. And people are really interested in it. And we have a plan to be active with the academic and scientific communities to cooperate on research. Atlantic City is a tourist destination, so we think this is the perfect place to launch this industry. And we're hoping that our success will be just the first of many for the offshore wind industry.
Thank you. Thank you. Maybe you can come up for questions, and we'll open the floor, because there is a mic there so that folks online can hear us, they can see it. So, any questions?
You mentioned it was easier and cheaper to build in shallower waters. And if it seems like people are accepting of having them nearby, are there any incentives to build them out deeper, either from like a wildlife perspective, or is there typically more wind out over deeper water?
To get to economies of scale and really make a major impact, we're going to have to build hundreds and thousands of megawatts, and there simply isn't enough space in state waters that doesn't have resource conflicts. So the area that will be developed most heavily is in federal waters. Depending upon how close you put the turbines together, will impact wake effect between one turbine and another. It will also impact what other kind of on-water uses can be used. So in the earlier projects, they would site the windmills 6 rotor diameters away from each other. They found that that has wake effect problems. Also, it has very clear problems on commercial fishing. So when we're looking at projects in federal waters, we're looking at maybe as much as a mile between turbines. You pretty quickly run out of state waters to make that happen.
And maybe a question as well. It seems like based on what you said, I think what the experience in Virginia is that the regulatory climate is absolutely going to be critical in terms of who the winners are in various states that are seeking wind power. It's my understanding that Virginia was selected in large part for this Cape Charles, which is a Gamesa wind turbine research project, largely because it was a very favorable climate, driven primarily by the government. So it was states permits, which have now been taken care of. In the process of that coming, the request coming before the Marine Resources Commission, there was a potential issue that was actually identified by them having to do once the monopile has been put in place. So it's not a construction issue, it's an operational. The turbine is built and up and operating. The possibility for noise being transmitted through the monopile and having some negative impact on marine life. So I guess if there's a question, I think our sense as an institution, it's not in my field, but from those who know a lot more about this than I do, the sense was there was really very little out there to draw on from the literature as to whether that potentially was a problem. But it was identified, and I think the permit indicates that it needs to be following monitoring once the structure. But the question is there anything out there you know on that?
Yeah, even the Virginia blocks that were currently announced, there will be site-specific DoD stipulations, which have not yet been fully defined. And so whether a wind farm can actually be financed and operated subject to these undefined stipulations is still to be determined. Virginia is pretty unique in that area because of Wallops. You've got NASA and the Navy and a lot of things happening in one area. But just going back to the prior question, I think this one Cape Charles project might be the only project you'd see in Virginia state waters because there are so many other resource conflicts. So all the development of significance will be out in federal waters.
Pretty much all the countries in Europe that have already built these offshore wind farms have fairly significant commercial fisheries. Have you heard anything or how they handled any opposition, if there was opposition from those, that you can relate to or be able to explain to the U.S. fishermen who have similar issues?
Yeah, we're actually undergoing a survey right now, talking to those folks directly. But you have to understand it's a totally different political environment there. The country's made a social decision to develop offshore wind. And they didn't take 10 years to talk about it. And so there have been some displacements. But in the end, they also are more amenable towards mitigation. But you know, the countries jumped right into this and said, this is going to be good for the country.
I had a question on your kind of your areas that were suitable for offshore wind. Just when I looked at Virginia, North Carolina, I was really kind of surprised that North Carolina had a lot less. Like
It's only because it's only a little slice of North Carolina. It's the study relates to areas that would be within what's known as PJM, and PJM is the Regional Interconnect Organization that portion of North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey belong to. And it had to do with regional power markets. So that's why but if you just look at you know, EEZ, Exclusive Economic Zone size off the state of North Carolina, it's much bigger than any of the other states. I mean, it's tremendous in size. So that's probably explains it. Yeah.
In fact, we'll see when BOEM issues their request for interest, a lot of area off the coast of North Carolina that's potentially available for offshore wind leasing.
There's a nice report available that a professor at UNC has done on looking at the potential areas of development off of the coast of North Carolina.
You see that, I would imagine that developing the environmental impact statements or doing the environmental research surrounding these projects is fairly significant in cost to the developers, not as significant as doing the geotechnical, certainly a significant aspect. And do you think as these projects, as more and more of them come on, do you think the cost or the need to do the level of assessment that is currently appears to be done, do you think that will go down?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, pioneers get to the other side, but they also get arrows in their back. So as the data set evolves and as both public sentiment and agency sentiment becomes more positive and there's more data, instead of doing detailed analysis for each project, you can tier off the analysis that's already been done because the ecosystems are quite similar.